Last week, we spoke about the outline. I want to explain this quickly. All right, I'm hoping that you're going to hear me now or understand what I'm trying to bring in here. We spoke about the outline. How does the research proposal should look like? What are the components which are supposed to be there? All right. So starting from this week, we are taking that outline which we spoke about last week in detailed form. We are trying now to break it down, all right, so that you understand each aspect or each component. So today, we are going to look at research design, all right? And in this research design, we are going to focus more on research methodology. Remember that I want to bring this, I didn't put it in my presentation, I've put it as my notes in front of me. I want to clarify the two concepts. All right. One, the research design and the research methodology. Those are the two different concepts. Students sometimes they confuse between the research design and research methodology. There are two different aspects, please. One, your research design is an overarching, all right? Sometimes I refer to it as an overarching framework. And in this research design, you are going to talk about various aspects. For example, in your research design, when you talk about research design, you can describe aspects related to your, for example, your research paradigm. All right, your research paradigm. You can also talk about the research approach in your research design. You can also talk about the research philosophy, or sometimes you refer also as your research paradigm. Those are the things which relate to the research design. Then you have research methodology. In your research methodology, you are going to talk about a lot of aspects. You are going to talk about aspects like, for example, the population, the sample and the sampling techniques, the data collection method, the data analysis, all right? You're going to talk about maybe, basically ethics is a standalone. But those are two different concepts. So what is a research design briefly? It's a plan to answer the research question or your hypothesis that you have developed. It's a plan, all right? But when you look at the research methodology, it's a strategy. The other one is a plan, the other one is a strategy. Your research methodology is a strategy you have developed in your research plan, all right? It's just a strategy. That's why in your research methodology, you are going to talk about the different strategy you'll be using. For example, quantitative or qualitative. So we need also to identify those aspects, all right? I'm not going to talk about a lot of things, for example, in your philosophy, where we talk about different philosophies or paradigm, all right? Sometimes we talk about a philosophy which you call it positivism, which normally that philosophy, students who are doing their methodology is quantitative. They will indicate that type of a philosophy in their writing, all right? And those students who are qualitative, they use qualitative methods, they'll talk about interpretivism as their philosophy. So all these things, they always relate to your strategy, all right? Or maybe to your methods which you are using, all right? And the approach, remember that other students, they'll talk about the research approach. There are two types of research approach. One is deductive, the other one is inductive. The students who are more on quantitative approach, on quantitative strategy, they'll talk about deductive approach. Those who are doing qualitative, they'll talk about inductive. So you need to understand all this terminology. But don't worry about this terminology now. When I think in one of the presentations, I think it's a presentation about understanding research when you use a metaphor of an onion, all right, an onion. It's where I unpack all these concepts in detail. But what I wanted you to understand is that these are two different concepts: the research design and the research methodology. So let's quickly look at today's presentation. We've spoken about all of this. I'm happy that we are now familiar with the functionalities as I've requested, all right? Let's quickly look at what informed the research design. What informed the research design is a problem. You need to identify the problem. So for that, you need also to have your research questions or your research hypothesis, the aims and also your objectives, the data collection method, the data collection instrument, and also the data analysis and all of those aspects. So all of those things are quite important when you talk about your research design. What are the research design components? I think I've spoken about some of those. One, remember that, can I explain this again? Most of the time, when you write your chapters, all right? Let's say, for example, you are doing your master's or your PhD. You have a chapter there, and most of the time in your master's, for argument's sake, your chapter 3, all right? Your chapter 3 becomes your research design and methodology, all right? Why do you say it's a research design methodology? We don't want to repeat the word research. In other words, I can indicate my chapter 3 as research design and research methodology. So we are moving away of repeating the word research. But basically, that chapter, you talk about the research design and research methodology. All right? So that's your chapter 3 in your master's. Then you go to your chapter in your PhD, it's going to be your chapter 4, by the way. All right? So what I'll do, I'll have a clear research design and methodology. All right? So if I can just put something on the chart there for you guys, if you are able to see that, let me just have this now. That's the outline of my chapter will be as follows. Chapter 3, all right? Then I'll have 3.1, 3.1. In 3.1, I'll have maybe introduction. Then I'll have 3.1.1. Then it's going to be my research design. Then I'll have 3.1.1. All right. I've just put something on the chart now. Let's say it's my M. Then I'll have. But if you look at my post now, it's a chapter 3 for argument's sake. It's my research design and methodology. In other words, in this chapter 3, I'll be looking at those two aspects. Then I'll start first, maybe say the first part, which I'll do then, I'm going to have an introduction, all right? All right. Or for example, I'll say instead of introduction, it's going to be, I was supposed to say research design. Sorry for that, with 3.1. That's my research design. Then after my research design, I will have introduction. All right. Then what I'll do, I'll explain what research design is all about and what does it mean according to various authors. Then I'll have some subsections there. For example, I've indicated, maybe I'll talk about the philosophy or the paradigm. What's my philosophy? What's my angle? Then I'll talk about the approach. Then from there, I'll have another section where, for example, I'll talk about the research methodology. All right, let's say 3.2 for argument's sake. Then in 3.2, I'll talk about the research methodology in details. Then I'll talk about aspects like my population, my sample, and all of those things. So let's just quickly look at what research design is all about. Your research design is an outline on how an investigation will take place. You give an overarch view, all right? And also, if you look at what Macmillan and Schumacher describe as a research design, they say a research design provides a framework. Let me just close this chart quickly. It provides a framework, all right? Or a plan for the collection and analysis of your data, and it also depends on the type of the research questions. In other words, your research design it also talks about your research questions, all right, or the research methodology you'll be using. The research methodology, what is a research methodology? It defines the method, all right, and the logic steps, and also you indicate what you are going to do in that research methodology. And remember that your research methodology, it also has different subsections, all right? In your research methodology, you are going to talk about the method you'll be using, all right? You are going to talk about the data collection method you'll be using. You are going to talk about the data collection instrument you'll be using. So all those aspects, they need to form part of your research methodology together with your population, your sample techniques, and your sample techniques. And remember that aspects like, for example, ethics, it's a standalone. It has nothing to do with your research methodology. It's a subsection on its own. But there is another aspect you need to include in your research methodology. You need to tell us about the trustworthiness of your study. In other words, how are you going to ensure trustworthiness of the different data collection instruments you'll be using? Then you talk about aspects like the credibility, validity of the data collection instrument, and all of those. All right. So those are the aspects which you want to see. Those are the aspects we want to see under your research methodology. All right, I want us to look at the difference between the two, a method and methodology. What's the difference? Let's quickly look at the difference. Basically, a method or methods are techniques or processes we use to conduct our research. All right, method is a technique or a process. Remember that always your method, for example, a method could be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method. Those are methods. But the methodology is the discipline or body of knowledge that utilizes this method. In other words, if I say my method is quantitative method, I'll talk about a methodology. For example, I'll talk about ethnography, for example, all right? And please, all of these concepts like ethnography, paradigm, and all of this, we'll be sharing them in one of the presentation. I think if you guys you'll attend this presentation where I talk about the metaphor of onion in understanding the research, you'll understand this concept clearly. But for now, let's leave the difference between method and methodology, being method is a process or a technique. In other words, when you talk about research methods, you are going to talk about quantitative, qualitative, or mixed. I'm talking about from the College of Education, for argument's sake, all right? And I'm hoping also the other colleges, all right? The methodology, it's where you're going to broaden it now, all right? And talk about it, certain discipline. But the other concept which also you need to understand what is a paradigm. Sometimes a paradigm, it's either you use the word paradigm or a philosophy. Please, sometimes we use those words interchangeably. All right. There are various paradigms of philosophies. All right. We have the one which sometimes we call it a philosophy of positivism. We've spoken about that one. And also we have a philosophy of realism and philosophy of, for example, interpretivism, constructivism, pragmatism. All of those are philosophies. All right. So sometimes you also like to describe those philosophies, but make sure that whatever philosophy you use in your research, it also aligns to the methodology. If, for example, my research method is quantitative, maybe I'll share a philosophy related to positivism. But if, for example, my methodology is qualitative, maybe I'll talk about a philosophy which I call interpretivism, all right? Because remember that interpretivism, most of the time, why we align it to qualitative, because you want to get the understanding and the perception of the participants. And that's why the method becomes qualitative. The data collection instrument maybe can use a group interview or focus group interviews or observation, all right? So those are the things we also look at when we design some of these aspects. I want us to look at selection of the research paradigm and research method. How do you select all of those things? You need also to be aware that all of these things, they align together. Remember that we have what you call the research design, all right? We have what you call the research approach. And also we have what you call the research methods and an example, or definitely I'll give some examples around that. Let's say, for example, my approach is more quantitative. Then it means in my approach, I can use the different research methods, right? Which I can use a survey. In my survey, I can talk about a longitudinal study, or I can talk about a cross-sectional study. What's the difference between the two? Basically, you are cross-sectional. It's whereby in your case, in your writing, your research is more cross-sectional. In other words, it says you collect this data once off, then you're not going to collect it again. If I write my M or my honors or my D, it's more cross-sectional. In other words, I'm not going to collect the same data over a certain period of time. I just collect it for this study, that's all. But if I write a longitudinal study, what I'll do, it means that I can collect data over and over again. You find that you have this research you are doing, but you don't do it once. And most of the time, if we do research studies and you want to write reports, what you normally do, you find that you collect the data over a period of time. You collect data for the first time, the second time, and all of this. As you are developing your writing, you are comparing the responses or the participant responses based on the data collected. It becomes more longitudinal. It's not a once-off study, all right? And all of this, if I talk about my paradigm or my design, it's going to be more positivism if I rely to qualitative, all right? But if I rely to qualitative, I can talk about anti-positivism, I can talk about interpretivism and all of those. And also I need to understand that there's a research design, which you call it critical theory, where my research approach could be critical and also action oriented. So I'm not going to talk about all of those things because it depends also in your writing, all right? So we just mentioned some of those aspects, but each student's writing is different. So what we normally do, when we look at your submission, we look at all of these things to say, are they talking together? For example, if I'm in quantitative, I'm expecting a student to indicate a philosophy or a paradigm which talks to quantitative. And also I expect also the data collection to be the same. I can't have a student talks about quantitative methods And when I look at the data collection instrument, a student tells me about interview schedules or observations. I can't, but I'm looking at all of those things to be aligned. All right.
I might have missed it. What did you say is the most appropriate paradigm for mixed method?
No.
If you are using
Remember
mixed
that.
methods.
All right. Listen to this. What is a mixed method? Basically, a mixed method, it's where you use more than one method of research, is it?
Yes.
We are using both quantitative and qualitative. So yes, if you have a mixed method as your method, you have mixed methods, all right? As a strategy, what's going to happen? In other words, you are going to talk about all let's say more than one paradigm of philosophy. You are going to talk about a philosophy or a paradigm which relates to quantitative and also with the one which relates to qualitative. There's no one paradigm or philosophy for mixed method. I'm not sure if you understand what I'm trying to say here. It's always, for example, let me just explain it this way. If my method is mixed method, what does it say about data collection? It means I'm going to use two types of data collection, is it? There's a data I'm going to collect quantitatively, and there's a data I'm going to collect qualitatively. Then it means I'll have maybe two types of instruments. One maybe could be a survey or a questionnaire. The other one could be maybe interview. And all of this, they cover mixed method. Remember that the only difference, I'm not sure if you know the description of a mixed method. A mixed method is whereby a researcher uses both quantitative and qualitative. Simple. Then we say it's a mixed method. I'm not sure if you want me to explain it further. In other words, there's no specific philosophy or paradigm. You are going to use a paradigm which talks to quantitative and qualitative because you are using mixed method. So you can't have mixed method. Then when I look at the paradigm, you use only one paradigm which relates to qualitative. I'll ask you, what about the one which talks to quantitative? Because you are using a mixed method in your research. So there must be two. The other one must relate to quantitative, the other one must relate to qualitative.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Doc. Doc, can you please assist clarify the difference, if there is any, between the research paradigm, which is the philosophy, against the research approach? I couldn't get it correct there, Doc. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put it in this way. You have, under your research design, you need to talk about the following. Hopefully, other students will talk about all of these things, but what I'm trying to say, in your research design, you need to tell us about the approach you'll be using. And remember that approach is not a method, all right? The approach which you normally use and are common, especially in social sciences, is deductive and inductive. Those are the two approaches. So students who are more aligning to quantitative method, their approach, they will talk about deductive approach. And those who are aligning their research methods towards qualitative, is going to be more on inductive approach. All right. So, but all this, the approach and the design. Remember that, guys. I'm not sure if this makes sense to you. When I've started, I've said the research design is an overarching concept. All right. That's why I've put there on my chart that example. Let's say in chapter 3, you have a research design. And in my research design, what I'll do, I'll talk about the research philosophy or paradigm, and I'll describe it. All right. Then I'll talk again in my research design. I'll talk maybe about the approach. Then I'll explain the approach, which I'm going to use. Then after I'm done with all of those, then I'll have another subsection, which I'll talk about the research methodology. We'll talk about all of those things like your data collection and all of those, and sample population. So now, my research design, which I've developed, it needs also to align to my research methodology, by the way. If my approach there, I said my approach is going to be, the method is going to be quantitative, then I'll say as a researcher, the approach is going to be more quantitative, and I'm going to use a deductive approach in my study. Then I explain what is the deductive approach, all right? And give example on how it does talk to my research. The same thing if it's qualitative. So we need to understand this. I think the best way, if you have positioned, you have mapped out all these things in a form of an outline with subsections, you'll be able to get it right. And the other thing which I always say to my students, make sure that when you write sometimes, don't write all those lengthy paragraphs and all of those things. Break your writing into subsections, because if you break it so clearly, for example, if I have the main heading there being research design, then I have the first subsection. Then my first subsection, for example, is philosophy or a paradigm. Then when someone reads that paragraph, will understand what philosophy or paradigm you'll be using. All right, it becomes clearer. But if you infuse things in different paragraphs, it's not easy to pick up where the angle it is. All right. But I think that's how far I can explain that, except honestly speaking, guys, some of these things, when we explain them like this, they don't make sense. But if there's a submission which I'm able to look at, I'm able to get better feedback around that. But yeah, that's how far I can go with that one.
Thanks, Doc. Just a follow-up. Doc, I want to understand, what does it mean to be inductive in my approach or being deductive in my approach when conducting the research? Maybe if possible, Doc, can you use the example maybe for better articulation and understanding? Thank you.
All right. Can I respond to this quickly? I'm not trying to be rude. I'm honest here. We are doing research, all of us, is it? And the only way to understand this terminology, you need to go and revisit research methodology textbooks or writtens. They explain the difference between the two. Unfortunately, I can't go on details, and I still have a full presentation on those aspects. All right. So for now, I was just indicating to you to say you need also to understand the approach you are using. And I'm expecting us as students to go and do further research around it. But what I'm trying to say, remember that the difference between the two is that when you say it's deductive, you are moving from to an unknown, to a known, to an unknown phenomena. When it's inductive, you are moving from an unknown to a known to an unknown phenomena. So you need to indicate definitely to say my method, my approach is deductive, because the concept which I'm working on or my research, I'm taking it from this perspective, which is more known, and I'm trying to generalize around it. So what I want you guys as my students, I'm not going to explain each concept the way it's supposed to be, but you are the one to say, all right, I think that my approach is going to be deductive. You go and beef up that aspect. Unfortunately, to learn, I can't just go in to give each details the way you expect me to give it. Unfortunately, I'll spend hours and hours. And like I'm saying, I'm not rude, please listen to me. I'm not rude. But I still have a presentation around that. So when you attend that presentation, especially the one I've referred to, when I'll I'll be using the metaphor of an onion to understand research. Then definitely I'll give more practical examples, and I'm hoping students will understand from that perspective. But what I was trying to say here, I was just trying to say to my student, understand the difference between all of these concepts, to say they must be able to be aligned, all right? So in other words, the aim of this section is to say, when you look at some of the aspects which talks about research methodology and research design, those are the two different concepts. And what are the sub aspects you can include in each or under those two concepts, all right? So that's how far I can go for now. Unfortunately, I don't want to give an example which is incorrect, basically, all right? Then at the end of the day, I mislead you. But what I'm trying to say, let's go further around it, all of us. We are there. The tool is available to everyone. Go to Google Scholar if you are from the College of Education and see on how people have used both approaches. But I was just trying to explain to say we have these two types of approaches. And that the main of talking about, please can you listen to me now? The main aim of talking about an approach and a method, I wanted to give you to say these two things are different, please. Quantitative, it will never be an approach. It is a method, all right? But approach, we talk about both. It's either deductive or inductive as per different research methods. So we need to leave it on that space now. All right, let me just quickly go to the chart. And the other thing, colleagues, if you have a writing where you have indicated some of these things, send it to me. I know that I'm owing, I think, 2 students their submission, and I'm hoping that by Monday you get your submissions. So the other 5, I've responded to them. I'm just left with only 2. Send it to me, then I'll give you feedback in your writing, all right? It works better in that way. All right, I think there's nothing now. Let me just quickly move. 1, we need to talk about population. What is a population? A population consists of all units or the universe, all right, possessing the attributes or characteristics in which the researcher is interested. Remember that in your population, we have different types of population. But sometimes when you write, we don't talk about target population or accessible population. Those are the 2 different things, all right? Sometimes we talk about the concept participants. It's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Sometimes you can just say population, but this population is divided into 2, all right? Between target and accessible. What's the target population? I'll give you an example now. A target population, for example, if I write a research, then I say my target population consists of all teachers in Gauteng province. That's a target, all right? There's teachers in Gauteng province, all right? That's my target population. But remember that I can't do my study around all teachers in Gauteng province. There are too many. How can I approach all of them? Then I'll take my target population and narrow it down to a population which I call it accessible population. Then I'll end up having what I call accessible population, all right? In other words, the population which I can reach as the researcher. Then I'll say, definitely my target population is Gauteng teachers, that's my target, but I narrow it down to accessible. Then I'll say within Gauteng, maybe my accessible population will be teachers in a certain district or municipality. Then I'll say maybe I'll focus only on a Google. Colleague, someone's mic is on. Then I'll project it to my accessible population, which is teachers at Ekurhuleni. All right. So in other words, what I'll do, instead of approaching all the teachers in Gauteng, I'll approach only my accessible population, which are teachers in Urule. So there's a difference between these two concepts, as per example. But what does the literature say about that? All right, where do I start now? The third bullet, target versus accessible population. According to these authors, they say target population is everyone or everything that falls within the population. I've just mentioned that. But your accessible refers only to the section. Remember now, it was Gauteng. Now I refer to a specific section now, or specific population, which is now all the teachers in Uruleni. So I've narrowed it down, all right? That can actually be included in our study, all right? And all those whom I can reach. But don't be worried about this concept. I've seen most of the time as students, I'm just helping, hopefully, those who are doing their honors and so on, all right? Maybe they can ask them about all those things. But in our actual writing, we don't separate these two types of population most of the time, except if you want to explain your writing in detail, we just say population, then you describe your population. That's all. All right? We don't differentiate between target and accessible population. But remember that your population also, when you come to qualitative, right? Especially when you write your research proposal, you can't preempt your population. I know that people, they preempt it, it's fine, but I have a problem with that, all right? Because my understanding about qualitative, most of the time, preempting the population can also be a challenge. You can't say, in qualitative, I'm going to interview 50 participants, all right? My question is, what will happen if you said your population, you are going to interview 50 teachers? I'm just making an example. What will happen as you are progressing with your interview? You are getting the same answer. By the time you interview teacher number 30, you already got the same answer for all the questions. Are you going to continue and interview the next teacher until the 50th teacher, even though the responses are the same? That's the concern I'm having in regards to qualitative. That's why I say to most of the time when I write my qualitative, I'll indicate the population to say the population is going to be determined. All right? Remember that I'm writing a research proposal now. In my research proposal regarding my population, if I'm going to use qualitative, I'll say the population of the study is going to be determined by the point of saturation. What do I mean? In other words, what I mean is that the actual participant whom I'm going to interview is going to depend how do I reach a point of saturation. That's all. Then when I write my report, remember that this is my proposal now. When I write my research report, I indicate when did I reach the point of saturation. Maybe I did reach the point of saturation when I was interviewing the third or the 10th participant. What does a point of saturation mean? It means it's whereby when you conduct your interview as a qualitative researcher, you are getting the same answer from all the participants. And you say to yourself, what's the purpose of me going to interview almost 30 participants after that? If, for example, let's say when I interviewed the 20th participant, I realized that the answer I'm getting in this interview protocol or in this interview schedule is almost the same. It's not about quantifying the responses in qualitative. It's about the perception or the understanding I'm getting. And remember that in qualitative, when you analyze it, you're not saying how many people have said this. You are saying what is a perception, so that you're able to do your coding, you do your grouping, then you come with a theme. That's all what you do. So that's why the actual number, for me, it doesn't matter. It matters when you're going to write a report, definitely. All right. But remember that I'm not saying that you should have a clue about whom you are going to interview. That one you need to have, honestly. But you can't quantify it. If you say in your research proposal, for example, in my research, because I'm conducting it at this school, I'm going to interview the principal, I'm going to interview the teachers, and so on. You have to indicate that, definitely. All right? Because we also need to know whom you have interviewed and what's your plan in regards to the participant you're going to interview. But you can't quantify it, honestly. All right. I think I've answered that one to say, how or when do you reach a point of saturation? I've just answered that to say it. Most of the time it happens. I'll make an example about if I progress with interviewing. You'll be able to see that, honestly. Remember that the interview protocol, you have an interview schedule you have developed. And as you are interviewing the participant, all right, up to a certain number, you realize that participants are giving you the same answer for all the questions. All right, then you try again, say, all right, let's say, for example, when I interviewed the 20th participant, already I was getting almost similar answer from participant number 18, 19, and 20. Then say, all right, let me just try interview the next one, the 21st one, all right, the next participant, all right, 21. But I've been getting the same answer now. Why should I go and progress and interview another person if I'm going to get the same answer? So I stopped. Even though my intention definitely was to interview 50, I stopped. Because at the end of the day, when I go to 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, up to 50, the answer is going to be the same. And it won't add any value to my research, honestly. And maybe I'll even come with the same concept or aspects in their presentations or in their responses. All of them are going to tell me almost the same thing. So I stop. Then I've reached a point of saturation. That's all. I just put it in my writing. Then I also cite a certain author to say what's the point of saturation and how to react if you reach that point of saturation. There are a lot of authors who have written around that. Then I close my process of interviewing the participants. Then I start to analyze my data. That's all I need to do. All right?
I just wanted to ask something with regards to the sample of your research, the population. What will be a number where you can say, okay, this research is successful if you are doing an online questionnaire? So how many respondents should you get and you can say, okay, this is enough?
All right. We are talking about two things there. You are talking about two things. One, population and sample. All right?
Sorry, yes.
All right. Remember that your population is the entire participant, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Your sample is part of the population.
Yes.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we have done now. For example, I won't talk about that as a good example. Let's say, for example, I say my population, I want to reach all the teachers in Gauteng. That's a population, is it? I'm just making an example. But my sample, I'll say I'll sample only teachers in Ekurhuleni. It's a sample.
Yes.
Now, this sample of teachers, you can quantify it, you can give number. Then you say, you need to tell us what method or technique you have used to sample these teachers. Let's say my population is of teachers in Gauteng is 1,000, but I'll say I'll sample only 200 from Ekurhuleni. That's my sample. So you need to tell us to say, what technique, sample technique have you used? And remember that when you talk about sampling technique, you need to indicate what other authors are justifying according to the actual number of the people to be sampled if your population is 1,000. You see now, there's literature around that.
Okay.
So no one will query, honestly, let me tell you, no one will query your sample. The only thing which I will say when I respond to your writing, I'll say, I see the sample, you have sampled 200 teachers, all right, from Gauteng province. What technique have you used? What informed this sampling? That's all. You need to justify me to say, based on a population of 1,000, I've used this author who indicates that the sample should be 200, 400, all right? Then you can even go further and describe in your context to say, based on this sample techniques and also associated to the population, I think my sample technique, my sample size, is enough. Right?
Okay.
And I'm going to talk again in one of my presentations about where I share sample and sampling techniques and the relevant size of your sampling techniques. So those are some of the workshops which I touched on. Unfortunately, with the other groups, I've already touched on that. But as I'm progressing with the workshops with you guys, I'm going to talk about some of those aspects, the sampling techniques, and also the sample size as suggested by various authors. So what we normally say to you when you write your research, if you justify it with evidence, I don't think no one will dispute. But remember that when you do an external investigation or reading of your work, we also look at what those authors have said, so that we also satisfy ourselves that you are citing correct information from various authors, so that we do not put information which is not ethical there. So that's why I will say to you, sometimes it's not easy to determine the actual number of the sample, but you need to justify it, honestly. All right?
Okay.
Yeah,
One last question. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry, just one last question. With regards to the questionnaire, because sometimes they'll say if it's a yes or a no type of question, then it could be, quantitative, versus if it's something that people have to respond, it can be qualitative. So if you have a questionnaire that's a combination of both type of answers, where it's a yes or no, and some places where you have to explain, will you then say that it's a mixed method?
All right. The simplest way, when you design your data collection instrument, think about the method. First, we start there, is it? The method. If my method is quantitative, definitely I'll be able to see a survey or a questionnaire. It's almost the same thing. A survey and a questionnaire is the same thing.
Yes.
But if my method is qualitative, I will see maybe observation, maybe I will see maybe interviews and all of those. All right. So when I design, let's say it's quantitative. When I design, I can have two types of questions. In quantitative, in my data collection instrument, let's say a questionnaire. Closed questions and open questions. Please be careful about all of those. All right. You have closed questions. It's where maybe I'll expect my respondents to respond to a 2 scale. In your case, your 2 scale is going to be between yes and no. It's a Likert scale, that one. A 2 Likert scale, all right? Which is yes or no. Then maybe at the end of my questionnaire, I'll have an open question. Remember that. Don't make a follow-up question in your Likert scale, please, because we are not going to be able to analyze that data. It's going to be a more confusing data collection instrument.
Okay.
So you must, if you want also to include open question, it's fine, but don't combine them. All right? Okay. Have the Likert scale questions separate and the open question. Let's say, for example, in my Likert scale, I use 2 Likert scale. You can use 3, you can use 4, you can use 5. If I use 2 Likert scale, it means all my questions which I'm asking, or my statement, students will respond to yes or no, nothing else. Then maybe at the end, I can have maybe 3 or 4 questions which are open questions. For example, I can say, what is your understanding about staff development? It's an open question. All right? I won't ask my participant to define staff development. No. Remember that a questionnaire is not a test. I will say, what is your understanding? Then they'll indicate their understanding.
Okay.
Right? So that when the data comes up and been analyzed, whether you have sent out an MS form for students to respond and so on, it will tell you about the open question, what the participant have said. And that is not a mixed method. Remember, if the data collection is method, it is quantitative and we use questionnaire, and we have open and closed question, it doesn't mean that it's a mixed method, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you
A
so
mixed
much.
method, it's whereby you use quantitative and qualitative and you design instruments. One instrument talks to quantitative and the other one talks to qualitative, because we have used a mixed method.
Okay, thank you so
Is
much.
it clear?
Yes, sir.
All
Thank you.
right. All right. All right, let's quickly look again at this aspect. I think briefly also. The sample, let's talk about sample quickly. It's a subset of a population. We've spoken about that one. It can refer to study participants, to places and time of observation, and so on. But sampling is the design task deciding which elements in the population will be chosen and how those elements will be chosen. I think the how part of it is when you describe the technique to say, I've decided to have this sampling based on this aspect and that aspect, all right? And also there are 2 broad sampling strategies or techniques which you normally use, all right? We have the probability sample and also the non-probability sample, all right? Let's look at the first one, your probability sample, in which I think there's a duplication there, I'll correct it, in which the sample is selected in such a way that every element in the population has an equal chance. It's very important. When you do sampling, make sure that each element in the overall population have a chance to be selected. That's the purpose of sample. All right? I'll give you this example. I'll narrow it down now. 1. Let's say I'm conducting a study in this school A, all right? And in this school A, I'm saying my population will consist of all learners. All learners as per phases. All right, we have phases, sorry. I'm just thinking about this concept, all right? In other words, I'm doing study in the school A. All right, let's say Mangaung. I'm just thinking about Mangaung Primary School, all right? I'm there. Now, my population, it consists of all learners in the school. If I have, according to the phases, which is foundation phase, intermediate phase, and senior phase. Now, when I do sampling, I want all these phases to be represented, all right? So what I'll do in my sample, I'll say in my sample, I'm going to use a sampling technique, for example, which I call it stratified, all right? Stratified sampling technique. And in this stratified sampling technique, it means my sample is going to be based on the different phases. I'll go to foundation phase. I'll take a number of students, all right? In foundation phase. Remember that foundation phase, it consists about grade 1, 2, and 3. So I'll take certain amount of students in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. But remember that I'll also have to justify how did I choose those students in each grade. All right. Then I'll go to the intermediate phase. I'll do the same, which is your grade 4, 4, and 5. Then I'll go to my senior phase, which is going to be my grade 7. All right. So if I've done that, it means I've made each phases to be represented. In other words, my population is more representative. Because remember, my entire population is learners in this school. But I make sure that I reach each group of the learners. Now the challenge is one now. Let's say, for example, I distribute my questionnaire in this school. Will I give, if for example, in my sample, I've used stratified sample, then will I give, let's say 5 to grade 1, 5 to grade 2, 5 to grade 3. Will I distribute the questionnaire in that way? My answer is, please don't do that. You rather distribute the questionnaire to all the learners, all of them, as your population. Then when you start to analyze your data, then you apply stratified sample. You don't analyze the whole population of your learners. Now we start to stratify it, to say, to take part, for example, 5 in grade 1, 5 in grade 2, and so on. Because if you don't do that, when you distribute your questionnaire according to the strata itself, the possibility of receiving questionnaires which are not fully answered by the learners are very high. What will happen if it's 5, 5, 5? You find that maybe in grade 1, only 2 students completed the questionnaire in full. The others, they didn't complete the questionnaire in full. You end up having a lot of errors when you analyze your data. So now it gives you an advantage if you have rolled out the questionnaire to all the learners to say, all right, maybe let me discard this group of learners who didn't complete the questionnaire in full and focus only to those who have completed it in full. It assists you to have a huge data set. Because what I've seen with my students most of the time, they always give the data collection to the sampled number of participants. Give it to everyone, all right? So that you have enough data offset to choose from when you do your result analysis and so on. All right, I'll just indicate in that one in passing, but I've already spoken about stratified sampling. There are a lot of sample techniques you can use, simple, random, systematic, and so on. Then the other one, we talk about non-probability. The relationship between the sample and its population is unknown, and the sample is not necessarily a representation of the population, all right? We'll talk about that one. An example of that, of a non-probability sampling, quota sampling. I think all of us, we know about quota sampling. If you go to sports, most of the time, I think immediately after 1994, we said each sporting coach should represent a certain quota. All right? In other words, we want this sporting coach to be representative. Then you also make sure certain other people are also part of that sporting coach. Then you call it a quota, all right? But the most interesting one, you can also use a convenient sampling. It's a technique. You can also use snowballing. Remember that convenient sampling is, in that case, an example. If, let's say, convenient sampling, an example of that, let me give you this example. Let's say, for example, I'm doing a certain research, right, in the institution where I'm working. And I'm also teaching a certain module. Let's say, for example, my research, I wanted to understand the student, I want to get the student understanding in regards to study skills. I'm just making an example, please. Study skills. and there's a group of students whom I'm also teaching, then I'll say to myself, instead of giving the questionnaire to all of the students around my university, that my first years, I'll say, I'll use a convenient sampling techniques. I'll go to my normal class and give the questionnaire to the students I'm teaching. That it becomes a convenience. In other words, I've sampled according to my convenience approach. All right. For example, most of us, we do that. If, let's say, I'm staying around a certain area at Guruleni, if I want to do research about teachers, I'll apply convenience sampling. I'll conduct my research in schools where I could access them easily, the one which is around my area, instead of going to other parts of a Guruleni. Then the snowballing, I think snowballing is one of the interesting sampling technique which came up especially during COVID. I had some students, I think a few of them, in their research proposal, I think when they submitted before COVID, which was 2019, they indicated that they are going to collect data. Some of them, they were using interviews, others, they were using questioning. There's one who was using questioning. And in the granted ethics, she indicated that she would collect data by going to these schools and collect data physically by giving the questionnaire to the participant, and they will collect data around that. All right, they will fill the questionnaire, then you collect it as the data. All right. So what happens? COVID kicked in 2020. Now the students had the challenge now. We're on certain level of lockdown. Remember, all of you guys, the student can't go to school and collect data. So she used another tool, the MS form. I think most of you are aware about it, where they developed that form under Google and all of this, then send the form to the different principals so that the principal will be able to disseminate it to the teachers. Unfortunately, the student was going to collect data in 3 schools. And 2 of the principals, they were not able to reach their teachers because the principal will send the questionnaire to the teachers were not completing the questionnaire, all right, online. So the researcher decided to use a snowballing sample to say, she approached the 3 teachers, the 3 principals to say, can you refer me to any additional schools around your area where I can collect data? And this principal referred to that student to that type of, to the 2 different schools. And the student was able to send the questionnaire online to those 2 schools. In other words, snowballing technique was used. In other words, the researcher extended the data collection to other participants, which initially were not included in the research proposal, and it was not part of the agreed ethics given to the student. But because it was a minor change, the student just have to justify in her writing, because it was not a major change. If it was a major change, the student was supposed to apply for a new ethical clearance from the institution. Because it was a minor, but the student have to justify it. Because remember that when these things are being marked by external examiner, they look at also what you have said in your research proposal and what you have done. If they don't, those things they don't tie or they don't relate to each other, they have a question around that. If, for example, you say you are going to use qualitative data collection methods, all right? In other words, we expect maybe a questionnaire. But in your research report, we're now sitting with an interview. We ask yourself, where does this come from now? Because your research proposal and the ethics given to you, it was based on that, on quantitative. Now we're sitting with qualitative. So before you can change anything, you need to make sure that you apply for a new ethical clearance. If it's a major change. The minor one, you justify it, then we are able to progress around it. All right, thank you. So what I'm trying to say and explain this aspect, guys, is that remember that whatever changes you are bringing in, don't sit and be excited. All right, you need to follow protocol. All right, that's how it's been done. Otherwise, you'll be surprised in your final document when it comes up to say, that's not the permission we gave you to do. That was not the permission. Then you start afresh, or you repeat the module, or you don't pass the module, and the examination of the document itself, or the thesis or a dissertation. So we must stick on those aspects. All right, we need to move as quickly as possible now, but I'll try to open some questions by 12:20. Yeah, research design also, there are two broad methods of data collection. We know about those ones. Secondary sources. And please, guys, I'm still going to talk about data collection in detail. All right. Now it's a matter of giving it, how do you put it or write it as part of your research methodology? All right. You have secondary sources and the primary sources. What's the difference between the two? Just want to give the secondary one. Your secondary, it's where we talk about the different documents you can use. All right, it's also data collection, by the way. For example, you indicate the white papers you have visited in your document, or the white papers you will be visiting. You indicate the policies, you indicate maybe data from, maybe information from the census, and so on and so on. It's also part of your data collection. Then you also have the primary one. The primary one, guys, is the one, especially the one you as a researcher, you are saying to me, in addition to the secondary sources I'll be using, these are the primary data sources I'll be using. And bear in mind the principle of triangulation. All right, please. Triangulation means you use more than one. In fact, it should be 3 and above. That's why we have the word tri, which means 3. If you say you are going to also make sure that you have triangulation in your data collection. I don't want to see interviews alone or questionnaire, where you say you're going to use questionnaire and interviews. Then after that, you explain the concept triangulation to me. Then I'll say those data source, it's not triangulation. You have used only 2. Triangulation should be 3 and above. If you say to me, the data collection, I'm going to apply the principle of triangulation, whereby I'm going to collect data using interviews, using questionnaire, using observation, using secondary sources like documents and so on. That should be triangulation. Even though you've used more than 1, more than 3, it's fine, but it caters for triangulation. All right? I think that is clear the way I explain it. Because I've seen students sometimes they like to use the word triangulation. And when you look at their primary source, there's no triangulation. A person have used only quantitative data collection, then a person says triangulation. All right? All right, Marcia.
I just want to check with you. You mentioned the issue of triangulation. Then if you are doing a PhD study, and I'm doing qualitative, is it a must that I should have triangulation, or I can go, if I'm doing interview, will it be sufficient in a PhD level, or is it advisable to do triangulation in a PhD study, or does it matter? If I could answer my question on whatever the data collection I'm doing, I think interviews could be the best suited. Is it how it's supposed to be, or it should always be triangulation that one must consider?
All right. I think your question is fair. What I'm trying to say here, sir, we need to use terminology correctly. That's all I'm trying to say here. All right. In other words, if you're going to use interview as your data, as a primary source, and there's no way you're going to use interview alone, honestly. Your data collection sources is going to be primary and secondary. Somewhere, somehow, there are documents you're going to talk about, is it? That's all. That one, it's given. But if you have two of those aspects in your data collection: interviews, and you have used some of the sources, secondary sources like circulars or maybe protocols or acts or white paper. Then you're not going to talk about the concept of triangulation, please. What I'm trying to say is that if I see the word triangulation in your data collection section, then I'll check if actually you have collected your data, whether could be secondary and also your primary sources, based on three or more than three sources. Then I'll be happy with the concept of triangulation. So if your sources are not three and more, please don't indicate the weight of the concept triangulation. All right? That's how we do it. Because at the end of the day, if I see triangulation there in your document, whether PhD, master's, or whatever, but I look at your data collection sources, it's only one. Where does the concept triangulation comes in now? So what I'm trying to say is that let's use the phrases correctly, all right? Understand what triangulation is all about before you include it in your work. In your case, you are welcome. You're welcome to use only one primary source and maybe some of the secondary sources. It's fine. We are not going to penalize you around that, all right?
I would like to ask, with regard to your reference to secondary sources, if I was doing research on, say, for instance, social class and migration, how would I use my own experience as a migrant as a secondary source?
Remember, I want to, somewhere in your writing, all right?
Okay. In
your writing, when you write a backup and argument, you indicate your experience, it's fine, all right? But at the end of the day, we want you also to give certain sources around it. Then after you have given the different sources around it, then you can also put the experience to say the researcher also agree with this, indicate the sources which have been used, and the researcher also want to bring his or her own experience as an addition to their secondary sources. That's all what you need to do. All right. So in other ways, now we don't stop you guys, especially if you are doing an ethnographic study. All right, where you bring yourself in the research itself, in the study itself. It's where also your experience is coming in. But please make sure that you also back your experience with something which have been written by other authors and so on, so that you agree with them or you add with your own experience or your own journey. We allow that. But remember that we always give authenticity to research if you also, as a researcher, you are able to convince us to say, I have looked at this research in a global way, to say there are other authors, all right, who have written about all of this. Then I'm also bringing my own experience, of which is good. But remember that when you bring your own experience, you also need to think about the philosophy of your research or your paradigm. You don't just bring things because you want to bring them.
Okay, thank you.
There are different studies which sometimes allow you to bring those aspects. Like I've indicated, for example, if it's an ethnographic research, people are telling us about their more experience in them. But what I'm trying to say, I think in this case, maybe we just need to have one understanding, all of us, the use of concept. Please, I just want to encourage you, if you want to use any concept, read about the concept and look at the different examples. We have a lot of research methodology sources available. Read about them so that when you use it, then you give a proper understanding around it. Otherwise, it does confuse the person who's going to look at your work. All right. I think we can end up there. All right. All right. Let's look at on chart quickly. Someone is saying there on the chart, I don't know how to answer that one. If you say a certain selected population are not interested, what happens in the scenario where the selected population would not be interested in participating in the research? Unfortunately, in that case, it means you are not going to analyze any data, unfortunately. And I'm telling you, there will be a lot of gatekeepers. There are a lot of people who are not going to be interested in answering any of your data collection instruments. So as a researcher, you also need to make sure that you get data. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do because there's no way you're going to write a report and say the selected participants, they were not interested in taking part in the completion of the data collection instrument. You can't accept that type of report. So you need to make sure that maybe you apply another technique, you share that technique. For example, in your sample, you apply snowballing. All right? Basically, snowballing says that you must touch base and justify. If, for example, you were expected to collect data in school A in your area, and school A is not giving you any data, go and get data in another school. Could maybe school B, and justify why you have chosen the school B and the technique you have used to sample. Maybe you can say, I've used a sampling technique, and you justify why you opted for that way of getting data from that school B, even though you have targeted school A. So, but at the end of the day, you need to collect data, unfortunately. All right. The other one says, can we also refer to the customer's online feedback as a secondary source? Yeah, that one is very tough. It's very tough, honestly. I think we need to be careful about, I'm not saying we're not supposed to use sources which are coming from online, but make sure that your secondary sources are sources which you can also cite in your document, and also you can give reference around it. That's all I could say. All right. And the online stuff, guys, please be careful about the online aspect, because most of the online aspects are not peer reviewed. I think you understand the word peer reviewed. All right. For example, if I go to post an aspect on YouTube, I'm not saying that we are not supposed to use YouTube, we use it, but aspects there are not peer reviewed. I'm welcome, I'm sitting here in my own house. Then I develop something and I post on YouTube. No one have looked at it. I didn't get any feedback from other people. Then I can't use that source. It's not reliable. We use sources which are reliable and which have been peer reviewed. Does the university provide statisticians to help us unpack our data? I think we do. It does. And please, you need to liaise with your supervisor or your department. If you are not, I know that there's under, I think it's postgraduate, there's a division there. They always do data analysis for students. I'm not sure if students are supposed to pay, but in other institutions, students are not paying. I'm not sure about our institution. But if you are not able to get someone else, you need to source that person, unfortunately. Or you do it manually, remember, especially in regards to if your data analysis or stats is not so deep, where you do only maybe descriptive analysis, where you give frequencies and percentage, you can also do it manually. All right, or maybe you get someone to do it who have access to that, and you pay that person, unfortunately. But you must find out from the college, unfortunately. All right, or the department. All right, another one says, if I go to the participant with the recorder, questionnaire, and take notes, is it still triangulation? No, guys. No. Let's ask. My advice: go and read about what triangulation is. All right. All right. This is a process you're talking about here. To say, in this qualitative data collection, what I've done, I have a recorder. I also have an interview schedule, which it can be a questionnaire. Please make sure a questionnaire, it has nothing to do with recording or a recorder. When we start to talk about recording or a recorder, it's qualitative. Let's say you have a recorder, an interview schedule, and you make notes. There's no triangulation, by the way. It's a process which you followed when you collect data. You recorded the sessions based on the interview schedules, and in order to back up, so that if, for example, you miss something when you listen to the recording, you can also refer to your notes. All right, it's just a process when you do qualitative data collection. It's not about triangulation, please. All right. Nolutando, you are saying do test fall under secondary or primary source. I've indicated examples of primary sources there, guys, and secondary. Remember, your secondary sources, it's either you use documents. If, for example, I'm at school, I'm collecting data at school about maybe my topic, it's about learner attendance or absenteeism. What source can I use from school? I can also go and look at the register, which they normally keep. Sometimes the school will say all the learners who are late at school every day, they put them in a certain book. Then it's a register. I can use that source. It's a source. All right. I can use maybe a circular. I can use various sources. I can use also maybe example like policy. All right. But when you look at the primary sources, definitely the primary sources, it talks about the different data collection instruments. In my primary sources, if it's quantitative, then I'll use maybe questionnaire. All right. And I can mail the questionnaire if I want. I can also do online questionnaire. I can also, if it's qualitative, I'll use interviews. I'll have maybe individual interviews. I'll also have maybe focus interviews. I can also use observations. All right. Instead of interviewing, I may go to the school and do an observation. It's also qualitative. Why is qualitative? Because the responses, when I analyze it, are not going to be quantified. It's going to be more qualified. All right. I think there's another hand. Can we move a little bit now? I'll attend to that. Let me have 2 slides before I respond to, thank you, to the other students. Now, data analysis. How are you going to analyze data? Remember, in my research methodology section, I'll have data collection. I indicate how am I going to collect data. I indicate the instrument I'll be using briefly. If it's a research report, is it? I'm a research proposal. In my research report, I'll expand, is it? Then from there, I'll tell the reader, how am I going to analyze my data as per research methods? All right. In my quantitative data, how will I analyze that data? Maybe I'll say, like I've said here, I always like to have, like someone have asked about statistical services. When I develop my questionnaire, I make sure that my supervisor look at the questionnaire. So the supervisor must give an input around it, is it? Then maybe if there's someone who's available to analyze the data for me within the institution, I approach that person, then I discuss them the frame of the analysis. To say, based on this questioning, the person is going to look at the questionnaire and assist there and there, all right? Then from there, we talk about the frame of the analysis. The frame, it tells me when we analyze the questionnaire, what are the things we'll be doing? For example, I may say, in this questionnaire, I want to talk about descriptive analysis. All right. In my descriptive analysis, I'll say, maybe I want to talk about my frequencies and also the number. I also want to talk about the mean, the standard deviation, and the median. Right? That all talks about descriptive statistic analysis. All right? I think I have it there. Also here, there it is. But in addition, I also want to beef my analysis where I talk about statistical aspects. In this, I want to do some statistical tests. All right? I can talk about all of those tests. For example, I can talk about factor analysis and all of those things. Maybe I can talk about a test which I ran where I look at cross-sectional analysis to say, based on this question or on this statement in my questionnaire, how did the various participants responded in regards to gender? Males, how did they respond to this statement? The females, how do they respond to this statement? Then I do more statistical tests around it. So all of those aspects, guys, please, you don't have to understand the program you'll be using. There are people who can assist you around that. Your statistical services person will assist you around that. And all of those things, when we do them, we use a program which we call the SPSS. All right? That's a program we normally use. All right? And that program, it does assist you to do a lot of tests. I just want to check something quickly here. So if you use that program, you as a student, you are going to get feedback around it. All right? So in your analysis and also in your response or in the feedback you get from the statistician will tell you all of those things. What do they mean? Then you are able to provide it in your report, especially when you do proper analysis around it. So what I'm trying to say here, if you understand me, I'm not saying that you must be good in these programs. No. Sometimes you don't even need to understand those programs. But your statistician or someone going to do the statistical services for you will ask you to say, based on the find or the data, what are the things which we expect them to analyze for you? If you don't have a clue, then the statistical service person will tell you that I've analyzed this and that and that. And sometimes the supervisor will tell you that you must tell that person to do analysis of ABC and so on, all right? I think the other important aspect here is the presentation of your data. In quantitative, you can present it by putting graphs or tables. And regarding the frame of analysis, you need to talk about which variables you are planning to analyze. I've indicated that one, and how they should be analyzed. Or if you want to do cross-tabulation, like I've just indicated to say, you want to do tests to see how participants, according to their genders or certain biographical aspects, they have responded to certain type of statements. You do cross-tabulation, and that could be done statistically and so on, all right? Qualitative also is very important. How do you analyze your qualitative data? Your qualitative data analyzed by approaching or using what you call the coding process. All right, how does it work? The interpretation of data, you categorize, you come with themes and sub-themes. All right, let's put it in this simple way. I'm welcome. I go and conduct interview. All right. I've interviewed these 7 participants in my research. And when I interview them, I indicate to each one of them to say, look, the purpose of the interview is this and this and that and that. The other thing, I get permission from them to use my recording, and I give them the reason why I need to use recording. And also I indicate to them that I'm going to take notes as they are responding, even though it's been recorded. And I give them the reasons why do I need to take notes, all right? Then from there, after I've done with all of them, the 7 of them, I've interviewed 7 of them, all right? And I'm done with interviewing them. Then what I'll do, I'll go back, then I'll do what I call transcription. In other words, I'm going to transcribe everything which they've said, all of them, the 7 of them, according to different, in all of the interview questions which I've posed. Let's say there are 9, right? Interview questions. So I'm going to transcribe the information of all the 7 participants according to the way they have responded to the 9 questions. Then I'll do that in verbatim. What does verbatim mean? I'll transcribe it the way it is. I'm not going to paraphrase. No. I know that sometimes students, they tell me that when the participants are giving answers to some of the questions, the language is not good and all of this. That's not what we are looking at here. We're not looking at the language. We are looking at the understanding and the perception. Then I'll put it in the form of verbatim. All right? Then now, what is going to happen after that? I'll sit with 7 transcriptions. Remember, I have 7 participants. Then I'll have 7 transcriptions. Then after I have this 7 transcription, as a researcher, I will send the transcription to all of the participants, 7 of them. Remember that when, in regards to qualitative, that's why when I was talking about numbers, to say you need to be careful about the point of saturation. Because now, if I have 50 participants whom I've interviewed, I must transcribe and come up with 50 transcription. And remember that I do have 9 questions. Then I'm not sure when you're going to finish to do the transcription. So now if I have 7 and I've done my transcription, then I send the transcription to all of the 7 participants to say to them, remember, we did these interviews, and that's what I was able to pick up. Can you check if everything which I've included in this transcription is a reflection of what we have said during the interview? Then the participants are going to look at that and respond to me. If 7 of them are happy and say, we are happy about the way you have done the transcription, then what I need to do now, I now need to analyze this transcription now. When I analyze, I can analyze it using various methods. The one which I always use personally, I don't know, we have a program which we call atlas.ti.8. You can use it, but that program, I'm not sure now, the last time I was using it, it was not able to give me themes. It does only coding, it codes, all right? So, but if I do it manually, I'm sitting with 7 transcription here. Remember that you may find that maybe one transcription is 30 pages, maybe the other one is 20, the other one is 30, 40, and so on. I'm sitting with a lot of pages here in front of me. So what I'll do, I can do my my analysis manually, where I'll come with coding. Then after I've coded, then I'll come with categories, then I'll come with themes. But the issue of themes, most of the time, what I do, when I develop my interview schedule, Remember, guys, we're talking about qualitative here. When I develop my interview schedule, already in that interview schedule, I've looked at my research questions or my hypothesis. Then I put it in a form that I also have themes around it. In other words, my interview questions in my interview schedule that are more theme-based. It becomes easy for me when I do the analysis. All right, but I don't want to go further with this, guys. I still have a separate session on how to analyze qualitative data. And I'll give you different examples so that you understand it better. All right. So for now, I'll pack it there. Then I'll spoken about the point of saturation again. All right. Piloting also is very important. Why do you need to pilot the questionnaire? The purpose of piloting a questionnaire, you want to make sure that, for example, if there are mistakes, you pick those mistakes earlier in your data collection instrument. By piloting, we mean that if, for example, I'm going to collect data from this school or from school A, and there are 30 teachers in school A, I'll pilot my instrument, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, with another school so that they must give me a response to the questionnaire or the interview schedule. In other words, I'll do interview with another school. And when I pilot, I don't pilot with the school where I'm going to collect the final data with. I exclude them. So that when I get a report or feedback from the school where I've piloted my data collection instrument, I'll be able to correct my instrument. Maybe sometimes you may find that some of the questions are not clear, some of the statements are not talking to the variables or the construct and so on. Some of the questions maybe or the statements are ambiguous, they mean one or two aspects. All right. So if I get that feedback when I pilot my data collection instrument, I'm able to correct. All right, before I can roll it out to the entire population, that is my accessible population or my target population. All right, I'm not going to talk about this. I think I've just mentioned all of those, but this one is just to indicate that I think there's a session which I'm going to run where I'll talk about understanding research, whereby we use a metaphor of an onion. I'm not going to talk about all of these things, guys. All right, all of them, but it's another session which I'll be running to say, if, for example, when you peel an onion, where do you start? You don't start in the middle of an onion. You start with the outer aspect, is it? From the outside, gradually you peel it until you reach the inner aspect. In research, what you normally do when you do research, you wake up today and say, I got a good research topic. Let me go and collect data. You start there? No. You start first by making sure that you have a topic, you have an aim, you have an objective, you think about methodology, you think about the research design, you think also about the time horizon, and so on, is it? That's how we normally conduct research. All right. All right, you want me to describe transcription? All right, basically transcription. While it's maybe in a lay term, I think the example which I've given makes sense. Look at this. What is transcription? It's whereby you write about what happens during the interview. You write about the participant responses. That's transcription. You went to the field to conduct interviews, and the participants have answered you in this way in regards to the question you have posed. All right. Now, the answers which you got, that's what we call it transcription. You transcribe them, you type them, or you write them. All right. In other words, you put a documentation to say, when I conducted these interviews, in the first question, this was the answer. Then you write that answer. That's transcription, basically. All right. I'm not sure if I can use another word around that. Yes. If, for example, you have a focus group interview, you also transcribe it. All right. If I have 5 focus group interviews, let's say there are 5 groups. All right. And each group there are 4 participants. Then it means my transcription, I will have 4 transcription. In other words, yeah, there will be 4 because there are 4 groups. Then my transcription will be 4. But remember that in each group there are participants. Let's say 5 participants. So when I write my transcription, I write them as per group, not as per individual participant, because I've grouped them, is it?
All right, so I'm not sure if I might have missed the explanation, but I'm taking you back to the population. Basically, you said something about if I do some changes, like let's just say I'm changing my population from maybe if I'm not able to collect data from company A, and then I have to now collect data from company B. Does that qualify for me to resubmit for ethical approval? Or is it something that I can explain during my report as to why was that changed?
Okay, and it's a fair question, honestly. But basically, remember that before you can conduct any research, you need to get ethical clearance, is it? All right?
Yes.
I think most of you know the process. You develop your research proposal, you send it, and when they accept your research proposal, you apply for ethical clearance, then you have been granted that ethical clearance, then you start to do your research. So if you want to change anything in your research proposal as per granted research ethics from the institution, if it's a major, remember that, major, then you need to reapply again. But if it's a minor change, and remember all this, even though it's a minor change, colleagues, you don't do those changes alone. You have your supervisor there, please.
Okay.
And sometimes you'll be guided even by the supervisor to say, I think in this case, let's have this minor change. Even though in your ethical approval, it was something else. Then you justify the minor change, please. All right. And if you do that, it comes in your research report. Remember that now we're not talking about research proposal. Everything has been accepted there. You are writing a research report now.
Yeah.
You indicate the actual reason behind the minor change. If let's say, I'm saying sampling or sample, it's a minor change for me because sometimes you may find that there are things which are coming up now. And you decide to say, no, I think in this case, I'm not getting the data which I need. I'm struggling to reach school A or company A, which I've identified. All right? Then I'll say, no, but I can do another approach or sample technique. I can apply snowballing and ask people in company A to say, for example, if I'm dealing with the chief executive officer to say, I'm struggling to get data from you. Can you be able to refer me to another similar organization where I can collect data from? Even though the organization is not within the province, let's say maybe in my document, I've indicated that let's say it's in mining, I've indicated a mine around Gauteng, and I can't get any data from this mine because of other reasons. Then I can do snowballing to say, why don't I look for another mine outside Gauteng, which have the similar characteristics? But I justify it in my research. Why did I now decide to do snowballing or use another organization which is not within the same province as agreed in the granted permission? I think that justification is going to be fair, because at the end, when I'm sitting here with your research proposal and the permission, I see why we have to do that, because we have justified. All right. I think, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that everything should follow a certain system. Don't do it alone. Involve,
Okay.
especially your supervisor. Then we get a better guidance around it. I think so. All right.
All right.
Thank
Noted.
you.
Thank you so much.
Noted. There's another colleague. There's someone who has raised a hand.
Yes, Dr. Kubeka, it was me, but in your last explanation, you clarified me because I wanted to understand what will then be the implications on the gatekeeper's permission when you do the snowballing. But you clarified me. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, man. Yeah, because we, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that your research has been completed. You can't be held by people, and especially, guys, I want to tell you there are industries where there's a lot of gatekeeping. All right, mining is one of those, especially if your topic is more toxic. All right, people are not going to give you permission to collect data in the industry and so on. There's a lot of gatekeeping around. So you need to have another way of doing things, all right? So I think that's, all right, there's one on the chart. It says, if I want to do a specific topic which there hasn't been much written on it, it is advisable to go ahead with the topic. E.g., it's something that is still developing in the banking world. Well, I think it's good. We expect you guys to research on new aspects, honestly, all right? But remember that I'm not sure in other sectors, but in education, colleagues, some of the things which we are researching about here, especially in the South African context, are happening globally, All right, but you may find that there are very few people who have researched about it. If we look, for example, there is what you call, I think that the phrase is running away. I'll just have to explain it. Maybe you understand it. Most of the time, yeah, we call them. There are times in our school where you find that there are learners. This learner is doing grade 11 for argument's sake, all right? And this learner, when they're doing grade 11, when you do the end of year analysis, we find that this learner has a potential to do well in grade 12, but the learner failed grade 11. Then we have what the process we call progression. I'm not sure if it's still there. It used to be there. Progression, all right? In other words, you progress this learner to grade 12, even though the learner had failed grade 11. Looking at the learner performance, we say, based on the grade 11 results, the learner can still pass grade 12, even though the learner had failed grade 11. We are going to give support, we're going to do this to this learner, and at the end of the day, the learner is going to do grade 12 next year and give all the support we have identified. And by the time the year ends, coming the following year, the learner gets a bachelor in grade 12, even though it was a progressed learner. I think you are familiar about those learners. There is a student who did research around that some time ago, just even before COVID. And no one has done research around it, I remember. All right? She was the first person to do research around it. But this concept of progression of learners or students, it has been done long time ago in other countries outside South Africa. It was not a new thing. It was a new thing as a gap in our scenario. So, but regarding literature, the student was struggling with a little bit of literature from the South African context. Then the student have to rely more on international literature. And the student was able to write that type of research. So what I'm trying to say, most of the concepts, we may think that are new concepts, but they are already existing, even though they are not have been explored in our South African context. They are there somewhere. So we just have to tap on those aspects. So it's also good to come with something else, especially if it has not been done in our South African context, then becomes a little bit of a gap around it. Don will be interested in your research also. All right. But I'm hoping that your writing, guys, is going to be more improved, and especially colleagues who have started to write on some of the sections. Maybe it's now time for you to start and refine those sections. And next week we'll be touching on, I can't even see the next topic there, but I think next week it's going to be on, all right, we'll be looking at quantitative data collection in detail now. That's what we'll be focusing on next week. So thank you, and thanks for attending, and bye.
Thank you, Doctor. Bye.